Hi.
Welcome to week 2 of Midlife and Death at Reconciliation. How are you all since we last spoke?
Good. I've developed a practice app as per the homework. Um, I've moved into a home that belonged to family. So there are generations of things here. Um, and more recently, over the last year or so, I had this awakening to the fact that not only will I need to get rid of things that belong to everybody else, but I am actually going to need to get rid of my own things. And so since last week, that's kind of what's been floating through my brain, which is every single thing I look at in my space, I'm like, this is so transitory.
Mhm.
None of this is permanent. None of this is me. And so that's been kind of a overlap of what you shared in terms of that coming face to face with your mortality on a regular basis, but also choosing what I want life to look like. So that's been interesting.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, it's and you really begin to take note of what's important. What is, in fact, we're going to talk about that today. But yeah, to be able to say, this is all, we're not taking any of this with us. At least, unless you're living by ancient Egyptian standards, and then you take it
No,
all.
no one's building me a pyramid.
Right. Exactly. So beautiful. So yeah, and again, it's not even like doing anything big, it's just having that awareness, right?
Practice.
Yeah, it's a and the practice sometimes is, well, not just mental, but visceral and physical, somatic as well.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. Anybody else? Any thoughts that came up, or how did your homework go, or journal entries? Anything you want to recap on, Becca?
I hung out with a friend of mine yesterday Sunday and found out that she's experiencing the same things, thoughts and feelings about getting older that I am. And it's not that we're afraid of death, it's we're afraid of all the stuff leading up to it.
Mhm.
And so I was happy to know that my best friend is, I'm not happy to know she's feeling the same way, but the fact that she's feeling the same way and we can share that and talk about it, it makes me feel good.
Wow.
Not alone.
Yeah, that's a big deal. And that you can talk about it,
Yeah.
that it isn't something you're just kind of shoving under the rug, or let's talk about anything else. Let's talk about Taylor Swift. Let's talk about
she
right.
she doesn't like when I do that either.
But yeah, so it's I love that. That's great. And it isn't always about the resolution, but even just by having the conversation and by sitting with the things that we fear or are concerned about, bringing them closer to us actually really helps us to process them. If we think about our feelings or emotions like um children that want our attention, and we show them the same kind of love, then there's a tenderness and a softness and an opening to even difficult things that make them better able to be managed, right? So that's beautiful, Becca. Thank you.
Well,
Yeah,
and I'll jump into sort of on what Becca had to say, which was as she was telling her that connection that she made, I I was thinking, wow, and I bet unbeknownst to all of us, there is a much larger connection to 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 many more people than we actually think. You know, Becca has her special friend with whom she can share these things, but for all of us, probably the inherent thinking in that perhaps is there's a whole lot more people that are available to be members of the club than we realize at all.
Yeah.
Well, I've told Rachel this, that I joined TikTok because my niece was on TikTok and I wanted to keep an eye on her. But by joining TikTok, I discovered that I'm not alone in a lot of the thoughts and the way I was raised and the way I grew up, and that there's a lot of people out there like me, which made me feel less alone and part of something.
Your tribe.
Yeah.
Yeah, your tribe.
Yeah. So
Really
important.
comforting.
Yes,
Yeah.
very.
Yeah. And that's
I
the beauty of community. Go ahead. Sorry, Sharon.
Now, I was just going to sort of jump in on the homework a little bit, and it, it's interesting how it gave me a perspective that I wasn't even aware that existed, and that was I was probably 10 or 11 when I bumped into my first kind of. I reread your thing about being 4 when you recognize and you sat with your mother
Right.
and you recognize that things die.
Right. Right.
And actually I didn't read that until after I'd written mine, but I ended mine with thinking, wow, how did I get to be 10 or 11 years old and not understand that things died? I think, I think the experience that I had, which was a small animal, a chipmunk, um, but it was my first understanding that things perished. And I think now when I look back, I think, I mean, I was heartbroken. I wanted to take it home and fix it.
Yeah.
and and um I realize now at this great length, looking back, how lucky I was in many senses to have lived that long without ever understanding that things died. It was really residing in the Garden of Eden, you know?
Yeah. I can
Yeah.
see that. Yeah. And that would actually be a really great free writing exercise for you to put yourself back in that, like, from your earliest consciousness to the moment, like what was life like in the Garden of Eden for you? I mean, obviously you wouldn't have contemplated death because you didn't know that, but what was it like to think that things just continue and continue
Well,
in this
and
plane?
it is really interesting too that my life was very much divided in two for those early years. And there was the Garden of Eden, and it was when I lived at the cottage with my mom. And basically, at that point, she allowed me to be a free range child. When we moved back to town, it was very different. It was very
Mm,
harsh. There were all kinds of rules, and
mm,
yeah, a good free writing exercise for me. No question about it.
yeah. It's always good to let's go back to that time. Let's just see what happens. And again, the beauty of free writing is you're not thinking, you're not trying to construct anything. You're just tapping into the unconscious and letting it go out. Yeah, beautiful.
Yep.
Um, so as we did last week, I want to open with a couple of poems. This book, so at the end of the course, I'm going to give you the reading list, reading and viewing list, if those of you are interested. But I've loved this book for decades, Japanese death poems. So a lot of these poems, if not all of them, were written by Zen monks or scholars at or around the time of their death. Some of them moments before they died. And in fact, there was a practice that some of the Zen monks subscribed to and some didn't, which I'll talk about in a second, but where it was like your final project was to come up with a death poem, right? So but I wanted to read a couple of them. They're very short because some of them are just haiku. These aren't that I'm going to read, but okay. So this is from just a general poet, Hasegawa Shumei. So he wrote, "Throughout the frosty night, I lay awake. When morning bells rang out, my heart grew clear. Upon this fleeting dream world, dawn is waking." And then I love that they give little stories around the poem. When he had spoken these words, his breathing grew shallow. Those pressing around him urged, "Call Buddha's name." But Shumei, rather than praying, merely repeated out loud, "Thanks, thanks." Then he covered himself and told them not to take the blanket away until a certain hour. At the specified time, they drew back the cover and found him dead. And so it goes on to say, it is the dying person's state of mind rather than the ability to control the manner of dying to which importance is attached among followers of the inner enlightenment sects. One who dies lusting for life in this world or for salvation in the next is not enlightened. This is why many death poems express not only resignation to death, but even indifference to the prospects of a world beyond. So the reason I'm reading that is because that's kind of what we're talking about today, when we talk about, what happens after we die. Another poem, and I'll just read that too. It's very quick. Geshu Soko. He died at the age of 79 in 1696. Inhale, exhale, forward, back, living, dying. Arrows let flown each to each meet midway and slice the void in aimless flight. Thus I return to the source. I love that one. So I love the description too, so I'm going to read that to you. In the writings of the Taoist philosopher Li Tzu, we find mention of two master archers whose arrows hit each other in midair. In the poem by Geshu, the arrows do not fall back on the ground, but continue in a directionless flight through empty space. This image indicates a state of consciousness in which the concepts of the ordinary mind, forming one's outlook on the world, have vanished, and the polarities, good, bad, life, death, etc., are embraced in an enlightened being. So I wanted to read those because that's the theme of today's class, is what happens after we die, or what do we think happens? Any thoughts? Anything come up as you heard those? They're pretty deep and out there. But okay. And maybe you need to compost it a little while. But yeah. Okay, good. So with that in mind, let's go to now I promise this is not academic. But I do want to talk a little bit about some of the theories, not all of them by any means, but to give you an idea of how long we've been thinking about this as a culture. So what happens after we die? And we can look first at some basic religious concepts. So we already brought up the ancient Egyptians, but there is the belief that there's a worldly plane elsewhere. So bring all your goodies because you're going to need them. Bring your dog, bring your wine, bring your concubine, bring all your jewels. And so that was a long-held belief. I don't know if any of you actually know some of these, but already. But hang on, let me move this out of the way. Okay. Olam Haba is the Jewish concept of a world to come. So the idea is that there is this place that's like this world, but better. And that's going to be accessible to us at the end of days when the Messiah has come and God has judged everybody. the living and the dead, and this is the place that is going to come. We are all pretty familiar with the concepts of heaven and hell, or paradise and hell, according to Islam. Christianity has heaven and hell. So we don't really need to talk about that. And then we have reincarnation, which we see in Buddhism and Hinduism. But what I think is pretty interesting for our course, and I am moving through these quickly because we want to cover a lot of ground, a little more practical stuff than just theory at this point. But I find it fascinating that science has also taken into account what happens after we die. So there are some beliefs that there is an eternal soul. And this is broken out into physicalism, which believes that consciousness only exists because we are alive. Our biological processes cause us to have a quote unquote soul. When we are no longer alive, the soul just returns to whatever. Juxtaposed with Cartesian dualism, that's Rene Descartes, that we actually only have consciousness because of a soul that exists outside of us, that comes into our body, and that's the thing that animates us. And when we die, the soul itself goes back. So an interesting way to look at it. There is also an idea of instant reincarnation, and this is called the cyclic universe theory. So this belief is that the universe is constantly in a repetitive cycle. Every universe would start with a big bang and end with a big crunch, and this goes on and on and on and on. So and infinitely. So because of that infinite number of cycles, you've already been born in it at least once, likely you will be born in it again. There are a lot of problems with this theory, but it's one of the concepts that's out there. The concept of eternal return. Now, this is kind of interesting. It's more sort of mathematical, but Friedrich Nietzsche and even some Indian sects and even parts of ancient Egypt also held this idea. The argument for this is that time is infinite, but the number of combinations of matter within time is is finite. So that means you can only, you would come back the same number of times, right? So like the same combinations would repeat themselves over time, meaning you would be reborn and reborn and reborn. So, and what that also would mean is that you're living basically the exact same life an infinite number of times. Clearly, there are problems with that concept as well, mainly well, none of these can be proven, but it's really hard. It's a lot of conjecture, really hard to prove that. Then this is pretty interesting. Universal consciousness. So the basic premise here is that death, the act of dying, releases your consciousness from the limitations of your human body. And that just allows it to rejoin universal consciousness, which always exists everywhere at all times. This is an umbrella term for that is panpsychism. So this idea that the mind is part of the world that exists throughout the universe. So the mind is just one of many things that's in the universe. And so when it's no longer doing the human body thing in this lifetime, it just goes back and will do something else. It doesn't die. And the philosopher Spinoza, same thing. God and nature are a single entity, which both have mind and matter. So they never cease to exist. They just kind of change shape, change form. If anybody isn't aware, I highly recommend reading David Bohm, Bohm. He's a quantum physicist, but he's one of the primary thinkers who's really beginning to bring spirituality and science together. And he wrote a paper in 1990 called A New Theory of the Relationship of Mind and Matter. That's basically his interpretation of quantum mechanics and how it applies to life and death. And again, it falls under this umbrella of panpsychism or universal consciousness, that we're just here doing this thing, and then we go back to the eternal. Then there's this is interesting. This is also quantum physics, or the many worlds interpretation, is parallel universes, which is any choice that's taken creates another universe. So a quantum object can take on, like a life, can take on simply because it continues on simply because it is in another universe, in another world, as they say. Again, difficult to prove because it really relies on studies of quantum physics that we haven't gotten to yet, but it's an interesting thing to interpret. And this is one we're used to. Nothing happens. Nothing. Eternal nothingness. So basically what happens is all conscious experience ceases at the moment of death. And the only thing after that is nothing, oblivion. That one is easily picked apart because many will say even nothingness is something. So what do you call that? But is anyone familiar with Occam's razor? The concept of Occam's razor? This is, you'll find this now showing up everywhere, and you'll probably use it too. Occam's razor, the approach of Occam's razor means that the simplest explanation is the one you go with. And that's why eternal nothingness makes sense to so many people, because we don't know. In fact, nobody has any freaking clue. We have no idea. So, yeah. Thoughts? Anything? That was a lot, but I just wanted to let you know, give you a sprinkling of this is what some people have spent many years and lifetimes trying to determine. Did any of those speak to you, or any combination of those speak to you?
Yeah, what I found was interesting was without any kind of like explicit really going out there to say, oh, what exists? I find it interesting that, for the most part, I was pretty familiar with all of them. Seems I've kind of like bumped up against all of the theories in some way or another without really taking the time to have a really deep internal dialogue around it. And I would say that I think the one that speaks to me the most in terms of what energetically. So like if you said, oh, do you like sparkles? Oh, I just know I like sparkles. So like if I look at that list, I'm like, what speaks to me the most, what feels the most true to me is that there's just like a collective energetic something that none of us can really quite understand because we're so material, and that you just kind of like have this experience and pop back into there and then pop back in here at some point.
Right. Yeah, universal
Yeah.
consciousness. That's or
Yeah.
panpsychism. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, me too, really.
Yeah, beautiful. So go ahead, Sharon.
Well, just I've spent lots of my early years sort of looking at different sort of religious concepts and so on, and even as a child, I remember sort of thinking, but that's kind of crazy, and sort of for a lot of years left a lot of those thoughts just at bay, sort of say I don't need to figure anything out, and basically over the years I have kind of come to that kind of pantheistic um under beliefs for myself. I mean, we know that thing about how matter never ever disappears, and that is a scientific proof that we can count on. So for me, that's about the most simple solution, the razor guy thing.
Yeah.
Occam's razor. That's about the simplest. We know nothing disappears. It transmutes, it changes, it and so on, but it does not disappear. So the thought of a universal consciousness, which in my life, I mean, it's going back to what Becca said about her tribe. Um, um, I can't see universally a consciousness that aligns with mine, but I sure can a lot of times. I meet somebody and I say, ah, you, I know you. And so yeah, so that's where I have to leave it, that I will at some point recognize that energy, that something at some point in the future, whether I'm here or whether I'm not.
Yeah.
Sort
Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. And that's all we're being asked to do, at least for these 4 weeks, is like, let's do a little, like Lorena was saying, we don't really think about this stuff. Let's think about it a little bit, feel into it a little bit.
I think about it a lot.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I don't know if I ever bought into the whole heaven and hell thing, because let's face it, this is the bad place. Um, but my husband Phil believed that when you passed, your atoms and your consciousness and everything just went right back out into the universe, and therefore you're all around. And I really like that idea. Um, but I also, reincarnation kind of makes sense to me because I'm fairly certain the cardinal that hangs out in my backyard is Phil. Um, and my cat was my grandfather. He acted just like my grandfather. I, I don't know, but what Phil believed gave me a lot of comfort in that he's all around me.
Hmm.
So like my parents go to the cemetery to see him all the time, and I rarely go because I know he's not there. He's here and around me and everything like that. And it gives me a comfort to know that. Um, I do also think that when I do eventually die, he'll be right there.
Mm. Mm.
And so maybe that's the consciousness. Um, I don't know.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. Great. Good. So
Yeah.
hold on to all of this because good stuff is coming up in the rest of this
Can I
class that
just
I think
say
is going to be.
one more thing
Yes, please, of
after
course.
after what Becca said? What I realize as well is that in my younger years, I didn't know anyone who was dead, right? So it's just kind of like this concept, but I have like this little nook now that just seems to grow exponentially. And the more that I have people that were here that aren't here, the more I feel like they're not gone because I still, like you're saying, Becca, I feel that energy. I feel that when I think about Elisa, like she's here, right? And so it's like, as I've gotten older, it's like, yeah, of course it doesn't end. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. Um, yeah, and we're actually going to talk about that very thing that the two of you just touched on in a moment. So, and I really want to get your feedback too after that. Okay, so what happens right after we die? Sometimes, because we don't know. I had to put that qualifier in there. We don't know, but here are just some things that when we talk about near-death experiences, we promised we were going to touch on these. I'm going to move, hang on a second. Let me just move this out of the way here. Sorry. Here we go. Okay. So 10 to 20%, not everybody, but 10 to 20% of those who have been declared dead experience an NDE. So these are some common experiences of a near-death experience. Very first thing is this out-of-body experience, right? Where you can see and hear details around you. There was I'm going to talk about this movie in a minute called After Death, but there was this very skeptical dude who was like, I don't believe in these things. And then he started to do scientific study, and they did, um, they were using the experience of a woman who was having a near-death experience during surgery. She died on the table. She went up and she was able to not only recall things, she was dead, but she was able to recall things that there was no way she could have known, including what was being done to her body, what tools they were using that she had never seen before, and what the doctors were saying to each other that really by no means should she have been able to understand. And that's when this guy said, okay, there's something we need to study here. So yes, we see the world around us, but we also will move into, these are usually somewhat in order. There's this connection to a higher consciousness right away. That hang on a second, there's more to this place. There's more than this place. Then what we're used to hearing about, either this huge white light or a tunnel. We see that in the photo here. It's pretty, or in the painting here, that we don't know. Now, I have read that there are scientific explanations for that perhaps it has something to do with the neurons firing in your brain that causes a white light to appear. But so many people have experienced this pull. And on top of that, there are heightened senses, which means you're not just feeling and seeing, and you're hearing and feeling and seeing everything. You're smelling everything, and it's not in an overwhelming way, but in a complete and total way. And then, yeah, many people talk about visitations of loved ones who have died, who are waiting to bring them. When my father was dying, and I think I talked about this in week 1, where he was in his cabin on his bed, and there were times when he was reaching his hands out into the air, and he was doing a lot of stuff like that. So he was clearly interacting in some way we didn't understand. And at one point, I think my sister said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm waiting for my mother to come." And so I can only assume that she did, because he died the next day. But he knew already. She's coming. I'm just waiting. So again, if it's not a loved one, sometimes it's a guide or a spirit that will come. Many people will see great teachers, or sometimes if you're a Christian, you'll see Jesus or an angel, that kind of thing. This is important too. There's often a sense of total joy and bliss, but some people also experience a sense of terror. And that the terror part is usually when we think of like the Buddhist bardos, right? You go through these bardos, these levels before your spirit ascends. And part of that is the terror of releasing the physical. So it's not so much like you did something wrong and this is hell. And no, it's not that. It's more of like, I have to come to terms with what's happening. And so that's what a lot of people will experience, is being very attached to this life. Right, Buddhist bardos. There's often a life review. Very quickly, this can happen, where you're just seeing the parts of your life flashing before you. Some people go so far as to enter other realms. It doesn't always happen, but they can get a sense of, oh, okay, this is what's waiting for me. This is a teaser of what's going to happen when I'm really not here anymore. Some people also learn new information, like here's the message you have to come back and send to others or share with others. Anita Morjani is someone who she's actually become like a near-death experience scholar, or she talks about it. She experienced near death and also was told that she had to go back to talk about it with others. And then there's the voluntary or involuntary return to the body. Some people can't wait to come back and talk to their families. Some of them are saying, please don't make me go back. This is too beautiful, right? Which is beautiful to recognize that. Okay, so this is the movie I was talking about. Interestingly enough, I've been getting, as I said, a lot of confluences around this course. Right before I started teaching this class, this became available on the places that you see underneath here. I recommend watching it if you have an hour and a half. It's pretty interesting, and it includes the story of that skeptical science guy who started to do actual studies on near-death experiences. So not at all required, but something that you can look into. Has anybody ever had or know someone who's had a near-death experience? Okay. Yeah, it's just something to think about. I don't either, or at least not that close. So, yeah. All right.
And
so, yeah, go ahead.
when my grandmother was dying, she did the reaching out thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's so I think it's pretty universal. There are visions, like things that there's levels that as you're crossing the veil, right? The veil becomes thinner between this world and whatever the next world is. And there are, to me, I think it opens up, or what I've seen it do is open up awareness that we don't have necessarily in this heavy plane. I'll give you, I mean, this is my only real example of close-up death, but when my father was dying, so he had, gosh, I don't know how many acres he had bought in central New York, but it was like 40 acres. And he had set everything up so that it would be split equally between my two sisters and his wife's son. So four-way, right? 10 acres apiece, whatever. And we could do whatever we wanted with it, you know. But as he was dying, I was sitting with him and he said, I just wanted you girls to have this land. I just wanted you. He was upset. I said, Papa, it's okay. You took care of it. It's done. The morning he died, my older sister, who was his executrix, called the attorney and said, okay, well, we need to put into place whatever the deeds and whatever all that stuff needs to be transferred. And he said, oh, I'm so sorry. His wife put a stop to the deeds and left everything to herself and her son. Yoink, just took it right out. And she also was dying of cancer. So she knew her son and her brother were going to get all the land. So what happened was when my father went into surgery, he died of liver cancer. When my father went into surgery, she called the attorney and stopped the deeds and never told him. So we didn't find that out till after he had died, and the long legal battle ensued, which we did not win. So yeah, so we lost everything. And my sister, my older sister, still won't even let me say her name, you know. And my response to this tragedy was, my older sister was very, very upset. Papa worked so hard. He was a professor. He didn't make a lot of money. He did, you know, everything went into this land. He wanted us all, his kids, to have it. I said, he's got everything now. He's got everything now. He's not even worried about this anymore. You know, that didn't make her feel better, but I really firmly believed that. Like, you know, so that can happen, you know. All right. So I want to share this with you, and this is for you, Becca. Hang on, let me bring this up. Talking a little bit about what happens for those who remain after someone passes. Yeah? Okay, so let me share this. Make sure my sound is on. Good old, oops, hang on a second. Let me stop that. I didn't do that right. Good old Patty Smith. All right, we got it now.
I have lost many people now in my life, and I know because I've been through it so many times, friends, loved ones, my brother, my husband, my parents, that I know with each time that we are all going to have this moment. It's part of the human package. It's part of the privilege of being human, is that we have our moment when we have to say goodbye. And it's nothing personal. It just, we all have to pass through it. And I've just learned that all of these people that we lose, and this is what I mean by experience, they're all within us. They become part of our DNA. They become part of our blood. And, you know, sometimes I still am scolded by my mother. 70 years old. My mother has been gone since 2001. And she's still scolding me, or she's still helping me. She's still counseling me. I still talk with Robert about art, about the future, my husband, about our children, and I feel them within me. You know, I'll be walking along and just all of a sudden have such a warm feeling of my father with me, or my brother. And so if we keep open, if we keep ourselves open, they will come. And the Italian filmmaker Pasolini said, "It isn't that the dead don't speak, it's just that we forget how to listen."
Yeah.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
So you mean my mom's still gonna come after me when I'm 70?
Well, only if you stay open to it.
Yes, yes.
I did hear her say we don't have to listen.
That's right. Exactly.
And in many senses, one of my experiences was with the passing of my mother, I felt a huge relief, because that influence had disappeared, in fact, and interestingly enough, it was not just my take on it, but my brother's life also changed immeasurably since her passing.
Hmm.
So
He's a
not
different
she
person.
was not one of the people that we would be open to listening to, although she probably has learned many things, and maybe I should be aware of listening to her. Maybe in a few years I won't be so fragile about that, but for now, I never. I that's we keep, if we keep open, they will come. I've had some losses recently, and I never ever was able to think of it in that way, and that is just I. I'm only I've only been remembering and feeling loss, rather than feeling that my relationships were going on at a different level. And that piece, what a gift. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, and I love what you said, that no matter what goes on in the lifetime, whatever issues or conflicts that you might have had, once that person transcends this realm, that there may be something else they have yet to teach us that isn't about, that they maybe were able to release some of their trauma, some of their pain, and come back uh, with some of that knowledge and wisdom that that they could then impart if you're open to it. Right. I'm so aware of the time. I mean, I was trying to cram so much information into this 1 hour. But I do want to talk about, let me put that down. Okay, I do want to take a moment to talk about, I wish I had a tech person, but I'm doing all right. Okay, death practice. Manasati is basically it's the Buddhist practice of death awareness. So we're actually going to do a very mild death practice today, but I wanted to share with you, as I said that, this is basically the Buddhist version of Memento Mori, but it is what it's called is the 9 contemplations. This is from Buddhist scholar Atisha. And I'm going to go through the 9. I'm not going to, I had like all these notes. I was going to go through each one, but I'm a Virgo, so forgive me. We're not going to do that. I'm not going to talk through each one because they are pretty self-explanatory. But what I will do is I will share with you, her name is escaping me, Joan Halifax's explanation of each of these. Joan Halifax is somebody who will be on your reading list too. She wrote Being with Dying. I know I'm holding up a book. You probably can't see it, but Being with Dying, which is how to be with somebody who is dying and hold space for them. She has a beautiful document that explains all of the 9 contemplations of Atisha. And so I will share that with you. I won't go through them, but these will be self-explanatory. So the idea is to meditate on each of these daily if you were Buddhist. So all of us will die sooner or later. Your lifespan is decreasing continuously. Death will come whether you're prepared or not. Your lifespan, like that of all living beings, is not fixed. I like that one. Death has many causes. So, just understanding that it's always there. Your body is fragile and vulnerable. Your loved ones cannot keep you from death. At the moment of your death, your material resources are of no use to you. Sorry, ancient Egyptians. And your own body cannot help you at the time of your death. So there will be questions around each of these, but I when you get the document, the PDF that I'll send, you can take your time and read through them, and it's really just beautiful to meditate with these contemplations. Okay, so let's do a little death practice exercise. So this is going to be to prepare for this. Have your notebook out, but we're going to do an actual brief meditation first. So this is called the last breath practice. We're going to do, given the time, we're going to do it for 2 minutes. And here's what you're going to do. So again, have your notebook and your pen ready to go, because when we're done with the practice, and I'll let you know when the 2 minutes is up, what I want you to do is do some writing, but here's the practice. Inhale and exhale as if it is your last breath. So pay attention. This inhale is my last inhale. As you exhale, bring your awareness to the end of the exhale, that beat between the exhale and the inhale. And just rest for a second in that gap. And then with the next inhale, you're beginning your last breath again. So the trick here is to really allow yourself, in the safety that I'm holding for 2 minutes, 120 seconds, to allow yourself to envision or embody, this is my last breath. It won't be, because you'll probably be doing it a few times during 2 minutes, but allow yourself to be present in that final breath. Make sense? Okay, so when you're ready, and make these long, slow, deep breaths. Okay, you can start. I'm starting the clock right now. Okay, so those are your 2 minutes. Without easy transition right into your notebook. 2-minute free write about your experience. And I'm timing that too. Keep your hand moving, got another 25 seconds. Okay, you can stop. Would anyone like to share her experience? You can either just describe it or you can read what you wrote, or both. You can also say this sucked, I hated it, and that's fine, or I couldn't do it, and that's fine.
I just found it really peaceful. Um, for a lot of years when I've meditated, that breath in between, I've kept fairly prolonged, and I've often thought that it just felt like this kind of like floating in being. Um, and
Yeah,
that's just kind of what it felt like. It's like, oh well, I'll get to whatever I get to, and if I don't get to it, oh well, and it'll be done whenever it's done. Yeah.
great. Thank you. Anybody else?
The more I did it, the more tension came out of my body,
Mm.
and like, my neck loosened up and was calm until the sirens outside started,
Bringing you back to reality.
bringing me back to the crazy downpour.
Oh, yeah.
And I had the opposite experience to Lorena. I thought, oh my goodness, my monkey mind kept bringing me back to 3 or 4 things to be done today. And I just stopped that and breathe and then and but and interesting, my sort of ending when you said it's time to stop, my ending thing was obviously I need a much deeper practice in meditation and taming the monkey mind, because if I don't, I will spoil that wonderful experience of moving on by grabbing what's behind. So interesting, so entirely different for all three of us.
Yeah. Yes. And that's the beautiful part about it. And that's how it is, right? Because you're all bringing your own individual energy to this. Not to mention, this is a practice. So you guys can do
Yes.
this whenever you want. It's a nice way to just, that's a little memento mori practice too, is just, this is my last breath. Do that for 2 minutes. I did it, I practiced it last week in preparation for the class. I was like, oh, this is good. This is a good one, you know, because it really brings a lot of stuff. Like really for me, it brought the the inventory of goodbyes right immediately. This is the last breath. What do I want? And there's a grasping. This is the last one. This is the last one. You know how I feel about lasts, right? So like this is the last one. And that's such an interesting reaction. I mean, for me, from my learning of this, you know, and my processing of this exercise is, oh, interesting. What can I then begin to let go of? And the more you do it, you know, the more it becomes more comfortable, I guess. But it's a very basic meditation practice. The 9 contemplations that we went through, that's another one. That's a much more detailed one. And when you get the Halifax PDF, you can actually go through it. There are actually also, now that I think of it, guided meditations on the 9 contemplations on YouTube if you want to have somebody walk you through it. And you just find somebody whose voice you like, because I hate it when I have a guided meditation. I don't like their voice. It brings me right out of it. All right. Beautiful, you guys. Let's okay, homework invitation, if you so desire. So yeah, basically research a death meditation practice. I've given you 2. There is also a guided meditation that I really wanted us to be able to do. Maybe we'll do it during the last class. It's beautiful, and I would love you all to have an experience of a guided meditation at least once during this class. So we might save it for our dessert at the end. But research a death meditation practice and try it at least once this week. So it could be this, it could be what we just did, it could be the 9 contemplations, it could be anything else. There are plenty out there. Or if that doesn't suit your fancy, research a death rite that you would like to incorporate as part of your own. And what is a death rite? It's part of a ritual. And this is kind of gearing us up toward our final project, where you're going to either create an end of life plan or create an end of life celebration, or even a something that you want to happen as you're dying. I think that was your idea, Lorena, right? In the moment of your death, what do you want going on around you? So a death rite would be, a practice for the ritual. So what happens to you after you've passed? Some people, like an easy one is the Hindu funeral pyre, right? And something like that. But there are many different death rites that, you know, for my family, we bathed my father before the coroner got there, and my mom assigned us daughters each a different part of my father to wash and anoint, and I got his hands, which was cool because we were both writers. Okay, then here's a journal prompt for you. Write about your personal beliefs or uncertainties about what happens after you die, and how do these beliefs influence your daily life? So, yeah, this is basically just a contemplation on all of what we were talking about today. What speaks to you? What doesn't? How does that belief about what happens to us after we die, or what you believe, how does that influence you on a daily basis? Make sense? Okay. And then, of course, Friday coaching calls at 1. Any questions? Comments? Yeah, buts? Okay. I did pretty well. I got us under 10 minutes over. So considering. All right. Beautiful, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. And I hope that I will see you
Friday.
See you on Friday. Okay. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Rachel.
Bye.